Hello, everybody. You know, a few days ago I told you guys to delete Google Chrome because they were just side-loading crappy, AI model weights onto your system without your consent, okay? Well, you know, one of those big things involves de-Googling your life. Now, de-Googling is a very, very, very tried and true tradition where, again, people basically expel Google from their life. Now, you might be like, well, that's just simple, Muda. Stop using Google search, stop using anything. But the reality of it is that Google is one of the largest tech companies in the world, and they kind of have that clout to basically push their standards onto the entire world, okay? They can basically force you or try to force you into their ecosystem, and in some cases it almost feels like it's a losing battle. Now, if you're somebody that is okay with Google looking at every aspect of your life, training off of every aspect of your life for its massive data, AI servers out there, if you're okay with Google having basically carte blanche access into all of your devices' backups, then this video isn't really for you. You're fucking okay with that shit. You know what? It's fine. You probably think age verification is poggers as fuck. So none of this applies to you. So the reason I'm yapping about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that Google does something that I think is arguably getting to be more evil than the other shit that we've looked at. So this is Google's cloud fraud defense. Now, this is apparently an evolution of reCAPTCHA. So you know those CAPTCHAs on the internet, those little tests? Are you human? Click these bicycles to make sure you're human. I fucking hate CAPTCHAs without a shadow of my doubt. Sometimes it feels like I'm losing my edge on the internet because I'm failing the CAPTCHAs, you know? But anyways, CAPTCHAs exist as a way to separate bots from the humans. Now, basically, because Google says that, listen, we're moving towards the agentic web, meaning that it's not just humans that are browsing the internet, it's fucking AIs. And so basically, to secure the entire groups, both synths and non-synths, feels like we're in Mass Effect land, you know? It's like, I feel like we're in sci-fi land. We have two life forms to think about now. Basically, we have to do advanced bot and agent detection. We have to detect automated and targeted ATO attacks. So basically, it's billed as sort of like, we're thinking of future security and fraud prevention. Like, this is a good thing, Muda. This is great. What's the drama? What's the controversy here? The controversy is that Google is basically finding a way to get rid of all of the people that are trying to leave their ecosystem by using things like Graphene OS or any custom ROM. Now, I feel like the internet has kind of moved to a place where, like, look, if you're back in the day growing up with like a PC or a computer like me, generally speaking, whether you're using Windows, Apple, or like Linux, you tended to have full control over your system. You could install whatever the hell you wanted to install. You could modify your system in whatever way you wanted. But obviously that mentality didn't really go towards smartphones. Now remember, iPhones and Android devices are not the first smartphone. Before these devices were, things like your standard N-Gage, Symbian operating systems, your Microsoft Pocket PCs. And over there, you kind of had freedom to install whatever applications you want, do whatever you wanted to do. But it was really when the first iPhones came out, one of these tiny little bastards, when they actually ended up coming out, all 8 gigabytes, they basically gave people their first smartphone access. For the first time, instead of just texting people, calling people, doing the basic stuff, you could browse the internet, you could take your photos, you could then install apps later on and, get a whole bunch of extra functionalities. But all of it was locked down. It was really only Apple that allowed you to install whatever they thought that you should be allowed to install. And outside of jailbreaking your device, you really didn't have complete control on this as you would a standard computer. So then comes in Android, right? Now, Android, since its inception, has been something that Google started as their project. They made it open source, so anybody can take Android and, basically fit it to their devices. So if you buy an Android device, since the beginning, you were allowed to install whatever the fuck you wanted. You could, in cases, root these devices and basically expose even more control over them, yada, yada, yada. Now, it seems like Google wants to take away that control, or at least force you into the approved Android ecosystem, which, long story short, is kind of what this is going for, right? So 4 days ago, the fellows over at r/dgoogle were like, Google now can require you to have a smartphone with GMS to verify CAPTCHA challenges. So this is a troubleshoot page they found out from Google right over here. And this page says if you're verifying on Apple's devices with version 15 to 16.4, you have to download a specific application through the actual store, right? So this reCAPTCHA tool on the application store on iPhone. Whereas if you're on Android, as long as you're, running a certain firmware and as long as you have Google Play services, you should be allowed to verify your humanity using a QR code that is scanned via your Android phone. So here's the problem with this situation, ladies and gentlemen. It requires you to have, as their own statement says, Google Play services. You know what, Graphene OS, I literally use it. You know what a lot of these custom operating systems don't have? Google fucking Play services. If you want to de-Google your life, you don't need to have Google Play services. In fact, there are ways to install this while you can sandbox them entirely so Google doesn't have this carte blanche access over your device. You basically lock it down like you would a savage feral animal that wants all of your fucking data. You know what I mean? But see, Google is finding ways to exert more of their control over the average person by doing little things like this. So basically the argument here is, listen, we got a lot of AI slop agents in the internet, we got a lot of bots. That's the problem with the internet. So let's find a new way to sort of analyze if people are actually human beings. Now, the issue with this kind of stuff, ladies and gentlemen, is it makes it so that access to certain applications isn't necessarily easy anymore. So if you tend to install things like Graphene OS, you're outside the Google ecosystem. And in some cases, there are applications that do block access through these custom ROMs. So for instance, according to the guys over at Graphene OS, guys like the Australian and Brazilian government app block Graphene OS. Authy, which is one of the most popular two-factor authentication tools, blocks Graphene OS. Ticket Corner, Chirp Dating, MataPay, McDonald's, Swiss ID, yada, yada, yada. So not all of this is good. For instance, I've seen a lot of people say, listen, Muda, I can't do a banking application because the fucking banking application is blocking my goddamn, de-Google smartphone. And a lot of it is because these operating systems, both Apple and Google, but we're looking at Google specifically here, are kind of forcing their own hardware attestation onto the actual user. And the funniest part about it is that Google in this case doesn't even need Play services. For instance, the actual guys over at Graphene OS wrote this entire write-up to show you that all of this stuff that they're going for, this attestation, existed since Android 8. You could use hardware on devices running Android 8 or later through API systems that were already fucking present. You know what I mean? And they even say it, right? Ultimately, the practical way to bypass hardware attestation is through exploiting the hardware key store to obtain attestation signing keys, which is protected against the ability to revoke keys that are being misused. Play Integrity API's strong integrity level is directly based on the hardware key attestation API, but apps using it directly can support aftermarket OSs, check the hardware attested patch level, and other provided information. The hardware attestation API also supports pinning-based security instead of only root-based security, where keys can be leaked and used to fake attestations. So again, literally they say using hardware attestation is therefore more reliable and lower risk for applications. So again, these are the fellows over at Graphene OS whose, ops literally do include, in some cases, Google, and then also, a lot of those big, companies like Celebrite that literally try to defeat it every single day, just so the big bad spooky state can break into your devices without a fucking warrant, right? Whose side do you think I'd be on? Would it be Google's side? Would it be on Celebrite's side? Would it be on the NSA side? Or would it be on the side of the people that actually produce software for our freedom? So anyways, look, at the end of the day, Google is building this system that they're billing it as security. And to an extent, it is actually good for security. The problem is they're kind of corralling people into an ecosystem that Google effectively has full reign over. Google effectively can license and decide who's who. Google becomes the arbiter of stuff that you can access on the internet through these CAPTCHA tools and utilizing, again, only the approved smartphones, not anything outside the matrix to access, right? It's interesting too because, again, other people that have been sort of researching this stuff as well have said that even when it comes to iPhones, for instance, what's really telling is that Apple devices running things like iOS 16.4 or later complete the same verification without installing any additional applications. Google didn't demand iPhone users install their software to pass the test. Only the Android users who refuse Google's built-in services are the ones that are getting locked the fuck out. And remember, this is something that sits in front of millions of websites. So when they're forcing you to use their services, they're effectively creating a situation where in the future, if you want to de-Google your life, accessing important websites may not be so much of a possibility for you, right? Now, I think this is really fucked up because look, you know, at the end of the day, when it comes to smartphones, there's really not a whole lot of competition, right? You either get iOS or you get Android, and there are the other options, like you can buy the dumb phone that you really can't do much on. You can buy something like a Linux phone, and to an extent, how long is it going to be until those guys start getting locked out of things, right? Like, what's happening over here is the apps are going to be the first ones to boot you out. What happens when the web browsers are the ones that start to boot you out because they use this situation to make sure that you're not a bot, but you're rather a human, but now you have to have a fucking Android Google approved device to go forward? I mean, everything that's happening over here to me spits against the ethos of what Android is all about. Remember, iOS is one of those places where if you buy an Apple iPhone, you kind of lose your rights to bitch about Apple locking you into an ecosystem, because for that entire period, you had all these Android devices that are genuinely open, and in some cases, a lot better than the iPhone. But except now Google wants to exert more control over these. And for the average normie that doesn't know already, these devices are getting locked down more and more. Samsung, for instance, doesn't really allow you to whip open these devices and root them as they used to. And Google's own devices are actually going to start getting into serious issues because if Graphene OS or any custom manufacturer is going to have issues with interacting on the internet and proving they're a human because they didn't install Google's draconian fascistic software, that's not a world that people should be fucking okay with, you know what I mean? In a normal world, in a healthy, civilized society, a company like Google, a company like Apple, any of these companies would be taken to court and they would be like, you can't just force yourself onto people like this. You can't do that. There has to be an alternative, a way for people to freely access their shit without big tech companies looking into every aspect of your life. When I build a computer, I'm not building it and installing Microsoft Windows. I don't build my computer and then install one of the most closed down operating systems and then bitch about Microsoft like looking into my data more than they probably should be. No, I install something like Linux because even though it's probably not as good as Windows in certain ways, like when you want to play like a, anti-cheat game, but for 99.9% of shit that I'm doing, it's better, if not the exact same. Except the difference is I'm able to access the internet, use my computer, use all the software without needing to let some big draconian company sit on my device. And again, I feel like the only apt comparison could be is like, imagine in the future of like to use some of the most popular operating systems, the most popular programs out there on the computer, you would have to use like approved operating systems like Microsoft Windows or Mac OS, and Linux would be treated as this like criminal haven. That's the kind of close equivalence that I can draw. And if that happens, holy shit, will you see a crash out on this channel that like a privacy crash out you've never seen before. Like at the end of the day, for me, it's going to be similar to how age verification is. Like anytime I'm asked for an ID, I stop using the service. Simple as that. The only thing that is an exception to me is obviously my YouTube channel because it's a pretty big part of my life. It's a pretty big, thing that I have. And also I've given Google and I've given YouTube and AdSense my tax information. Like they know who I am, so it makes sense. But if your random Joe Schmo social media service was like asking me for an ID, I'm like, you don't fucking pay me. Okay, why would I give you like an identification for no reason, right? It's like, if PlayStation asked me tomorrow, you need an ID to access internet services, well, fine, I just won't play a fucking game on PlayStation Network anymore. I'll just stick to my single player stuff, unless of course they go for that too. So that's just my reality of it. But it's gonna get tough, man. Like, I mean, you're gonna get to a point where accessing things like banking applications, your tax information, like seriously important shit is going to require you to give up a lot more information than you were ever going to be comfortable with. And what sucks about it the most is now with a lot of these, services like Google, for instance, corralling people into these forced ecosystems just to get more and more data out of them, really without their consent. Because what this is forcing people into something. It's not that they're doing this necessarily for your safety or protection or protecting the fucking internet. They're mostly doing this because I feel that for a company like Google, they realize that people using Graphene OS, people that are not using Google Play services, but taking all the benefits of Android, are a net negative to their ecosystem. Why would you be okay as a company like Google if people are, say, purchasing your phones and then getting rid of your actual, software through your phone? Then you lose that person. You basically give hardware away and you can't get anything out of it because that person was smart enough to get off the actual surveillance ship that Google or really any of these big tech companies offer, right? But it used to be that these people were left alone. They were treated as the fucking nut jobs. I was treated as like a fucking total privacy loving nut job. But now you want to take that away from me. So of course I'm going to make a video. Of course I'm going to talk about it. Of course I'm going to want to educate you. Google is doing something that I think is wholly immoral. I don't think this is right. I don't think this is very ethical. And what is really the fucking response to it? I mean, you probably should be getting comfortable using, I don't know, the web browser on your phone to access services you can't access via an app. Maybe go back to using your desktop computer. But if on the desktop they ask you to verify you're a human by scanning a QR code with your Google-approved device, then we're getting to a point where we're actually going to reach a situation where having real privacy, real control of your stuff just isn't technically possible anymore, okay? It's an insane corralling. I'm telling you, man, the internet's going to change a lot before GTA 6 drops this November. I mean, that time seems close. It's less than 200 days away, but that's 200 days for the governments of the world and the tech companies to keep fucking us in our asses. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it if you dislike it, I am out.